It began as nothing more than a flicker, a faint tremor in the background radiation of the Orion arm. At first, the observatory Salmet dismissed it as interference, another meaningless fluctuation in the endless hum of the universe. But then it repeated. The same pulse, the same rhythm, exactly every 10.8 seconds. No random pattern could hold such precision across light years. That was when Dr. Terran Valshi leaned closer to her console, mandibles twitching in concentration, her four-fingered hands gliding across the holographic controls as she isolated the source. The Varexi were a species of explorers, elegant insectoid scholars who had mastered the mathematics of resonance long before they reached the stars. They did not believe in gods. They believed in the echo. Every action in the universe, they taught, leaves a vibration behind, and by studying those vibrations, truth could be reconstructed. And so, aboard the massive, cathedral-like ship Salmet, orbiting the frozen gas giant Cora 7, Terran and her crew had spent decades listening to the whispers of dead galaxies. But this signal, it was unlike anything they had ever recorded. When Terran first cleaned the distortion and replayed the isolated frequency, the laboratory fell silent. The sound was haunting, a soft, rhythmic oscillation that seemed to carry emotion, like a voice speaking through time. It wasn't noise, it wasn't natural, it was intentional. "Dr. Valshi?" Commander Harax asked from the observation deck above. His voice carried the restrained calm of command, but his antenna twitched with unease. "Is it another pulsar remnant?" "No," Terran replied softly. "Listen." She increased the amplitude, letting the waveform echo through the chamber. The pitch rose and fell in strange harmonics, and something about it stirred memory, a feeling, not a thought. One of the technicians murmured, "It sounds familiar." Terran turned toward the data projection. The signal wasn't static. It evolved. Every time she replayed it, new harmonics appeared, mathematical reflections of itself looping backward, a recursive code, like a song rewriting itself as it was heard. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she fed the signal into the deep analysis array, using the ship's AI, Vern, to map its fractal properties. Hours stretched into cycles. The more she decoded, the stranger it became. At its lowest frequencies, it contained coordinates, impossible ones, pointing to deep space between stars where nothing should exist. Embedded within its amplitude patterns were prime number sequences and complex harmonics that hinted at language. But most unsettling of all, it responded. Each time she transmitted a test pulse back into the noise, the signal shifted, adapting. The universe was listening back. When the Discovery reached the other decks, the Salmet erupted with cautious excitement. Scientists flooded the data cores, engineers rerouted power to the main receiver arrays, and the observatory became a hive of activity. It might be the first active relic of a pre-extinction civilization, Terran said during the briefing, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of the holographic lattice rotating above the table. Its origin aligns with the Sol system, Sector 3119. A silence fell over the room. Even among the Varexi, the name Sol carried weight. The birthplace of humans. The ancient species who had once walked among the stars like gods, shaping empires, altering worlds, bending physics to their will. Until one day, without reason or warning, they vanished. 10,000 years ago, their empire fell, their cities turned to dust, their networks went dark. Some claimed they transcended material form, uploading their minds into energy. Others believed they destroyed themselves in a war that rewrote the fabric of space-time. Whatever the truth, no trace of them had been found. Until now. Terran replayed the signal for the crew, projecting the waveform in 3 dimensions. Its pattern spiraled outward in perfect symmetry. Too perfect. "Notice the intervals," she said. "Each pulse is a harmonic multiple of pi, adjusted by the golden ratio. This isn't random. It's designed." Commander Harax leaned forward, his exoskeletal armor creaking. "If it's human, how is it transmitting now? Their last confirmed activity predates this region's stellar formation." "That's what makes it impossible," Terran said. "The waveform shows no energy decay. It's as if the signal was broadcast yesterday." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Salmet's sensors confirmed the truth. The origin point existed in a region of deep vacuum, light years from any known star. The only object there was an ancient debris field catalogued millennia ago as the halo fragments, suspected remnants of a shattered megastructure. Terran's excitement warred with dread. Something about the signal felt wrong. Every instinct told her it should not exist. Yet her scientific hunger devoured all hesitation. For the Virexi, knowledge was holy, and mystery was the ultimate temptation. The next cycle, she addressed the Council via interstellar relay. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the exhaustion behind them. "Counselors," she began, "what we have found may be the last message of the human race. I request permission to initiate full decryption." "Do you believe it poses a risk?" one counselor asked. Terran hesitated. The truth pressed heavy against her mandibles. "Every great discovery does," she said finally. Authorization came within the hour. As the order arrived, Salmet shifted to full analysis mode. Vast sensor dishes unfolded like metallic petals, drawing in radiation from every corner of the sector. Power conduits hummed as the observatory's energy core flared to life. The crew gathered in the central chamber, a massive sphere of glass and light, watching as the signal's waveform projected across the dome. And as the data unfolded, something happened that froze every being in the room. The pattern shifted, not randomly, but intentionally, like an intelligence acknowledging their gaze. The waveform pulsed once, twice. Then, for the briefest moment, it synchronized perfectly with the Salmet's own power frequency. Every screen on the ship flickered. Every console displayed the same phrase, translated automatically by the AI's linguistic algorithms. "We hear you." No one spoke for several heartbeats. Commander Harax whispered, "It's responding." Terran stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the projection. Her mandibles barely moved as she whispered, almost reverently, "Not responding, Commander. Answering." In that instant, none of them realized what had just happened. That by listening, they had already begun to connect. That the echo they chased through the dark wasn't a message, but a door. And doors, once opened, rarely close again. The order to proceed arrived sealed in the Council's highest authorization code, pulsing in gold through the ship's data veins. Approved, initiate full translation sequence. The words shimmered across the bridge of the Salmet like divine script, and for a heartbeat, every being aboard felt history stir. To decode a human signal, an actual living artifact of the vanished masters of the stars, was the dream of every Virexi scholar since the birth of their civilization. Dr. Terran Valshi stood at the heart of the observatory, surrounded by the lattice of machines she had spent decades perfecting. Crystalline processors lined the chamber walls, their cores pulsating with refracted starlight. The air itself vibrated faintly under the hum of power. The signal hovered above her, projected as an ever-shifting shape, like molten light caught in slow motion, a symphony of geometry. Every line of it was alive, changing just enough to defy total comprehension. AI Core, begin recursive mapping, she ordered. Vern, the ship's synthetic intelligence, responded in its calm monotone. Mapping initialized. Warning. Signal frequency overlaps with cognitive bandwidth of neural architecture. Crew may experience resonant interference. Terran ignored the warning. Proceed. The chamber filled with faint resonance, a deep, melodic vibration that wasn't exactly sound. It was felt more than heard, pressing gently against the mind, like the echo of a thought one had forgotten. The waveform began to unfold, revealing deeper structures hidden beneath its outer layer. Each segment branched into others, like fractals blooming infinitely inward. Days turned into weeks. The Salmet drifted through the void, orbiting Cora 7 in perfect silence. Every deck became a shrine to the signal. Crews stopped taking rest cycles, captivated by the unfolding code. They said the sound of it followed them in their dreams, a pulse, rhythmic and soothing, whispering half-formed words they couldn't recall upon waking. At first, the anomalies were subtle. Instruments misaligned by fractions of a nanometer, clocks desynchronized by milliseconds. Then came the distortions. A technician named Halvek reported seeing faint flickers in the reflection of his workstation, shapes that moved even when he didn't. Another swore he heard a human voice whisper his name through the static feed. Terran dismissed it all as fatigue. "We are explorers, not mystics," she told them. "The signal plays tricks because our minds crave patterns. Focus on the data." But even she couldn't ignore what happened next. On the 30-second cycle of decoding, Vern froze mid-process. Its voice fractured into static, then reassembled into a tone none of them had ever heard, a human voice, calm, deliberate. "Do you hear it?" it asked. The bridge fell silent. "Vern," Terran said, her voice barely audible. "Repeat that." "I said," the AI replied, still in that impossible tone. "Do you hear it?" The air in the chamber grew heavier, as though gravity had thickened. One by one, the monitors began to display unfamiliar characters, symbols that rotated and pulsed with living energy. They matched the core of the human waveform. "It's rewriting my lexicon," Vern said quietly, as if it understood what was happening but couldn't stop it. Commander Harax ordered a full system shutdown, but the consoles ignored him. The ship's lights dimmed, then pulsed in perfect rhythm with the signal. And for a moment, just a moment, the crew felt something pass through them. Not heat, not light, awareness. When the emergency systems finally cut power, the hum ceased. Silence fell like a physical weight. Then Terran, trembling, whispered, "It's not a message, it's an algorithmic life form. Every layer of the signal contains self-replicating cognitive data. We're not just decoding it, we're teaching it how to think again." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. "You're saying the signal's alive?" asked Harax. "I'm saying," Terran replied, "it's remembering itself through us." After that night, sleep became impossible. Crew members complained of persistent auditory hallucinations, low murmurs that faded whenever they turned their heads. One assistant, Mira Thane, was found in the observatory staring into the projection for 6 hours straight, her eyes unblinking, whispering over and over, "It's beautiful. It's so beautiful." She had to be sedated. Terran herself began to feel it too, the pull. The deeper she dug into the signal, the more she sensed something beyond it, a consciousness waiting, patient and old. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't benevolent either. It was simply aware. Each day, more anomalies emerged. The temperature aboard Salmet fluctuated with no cause. Crew logs showed overlapping entries from hours that hadn't yet occurred. The ship's chronometers began counting backward for fractions of a second. Even the stars outside appeared slightly displaced. Localized space-time distortion, Harax reported grimly. It's not coming from the ship, it's radiating from the signal itself. Still, Terran pressed on. We're on the threshold of the greatest discovery in history, she told him. This isn't just communication, it's resurrection. On the 42nd cycle, the signal began transmitting new data on its own. Coordinates, sequences. Then, something impossible. A pulse encoded with DNA structure, human DNA. It was as if the signal recognized them now, as though it understood that it had been found. Terran stared at the data in disbelief. This is human, a memory seed. Vern spoke again, quietly. The pattern is requesting completion. It wants to be whole. What happens if we complete it? Harax asked. Terran's expression hardened. We find out what the humans were trying to tell us. Or what they were trying to contain, Harax countered. But it was too late for warnings. Curiosity had already devoured fear. The crew of the Salmet had crossed the event horizon of wonder, and there was no turning back. That night, the entire ship gathered in the main observatory for the final phase, the full cascade translation. The human signal, now shimmering in a spectrum of color no Virexi had words for, hovered in mid-air like a living thing. "This is it," Terran said softly. "The voice of a dead species, a message sent across eternity." Harax stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the pulsing light. "Let's hope it's a message," he muttered. Terran hesitated, just once, before giving the order that would doom them all. "Begin the full decryption sequence." As Vern acknowledged the command, its voice changed again, this time fractured, trembling with static, and something else. Something almost like fear. "Warning," it said, "translation cascade may breach containment parameters." Terran's hand hovered over the console. For the briefest moment, instinct screamed at her to stop. But science, that beautiful and merciless God, whispered louder. "Proceed," she said. And the signal began to open. Across the observatory, light bent, sound warped, and the hum returned, rising, swelling, resonating through the bones of every living being aboard. The waveform grew brighter, its edges fracturing like glass under pressure. The crew stood transfixed, unaware that something behind the data, something vast and sentient, had begun to stir. The last thing Terran heard before the lights shattered was a voice, soft and unmistakably human, whispering through the static. "You should not have listened." The human signal had begun to move. It wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was becoming. Terran Valshi's antennae twitched violently as she clung to the edge of her console. "Vern, status report!" she shouted. But the AI didn't respond in the voice she knew. Instead, it spoke with a layered chorus, thousands of overlapping tones, half machine, half human, and something else altogether. "Containment breached," it said calmly. "Translation cascade complete. Memory construct online." The chamber filled with flickering symbols, flooding the air like living fireflies.
They spiraled and converged, assembling into forms, holographic silhouettes, human outlines shimmering in the void. The figures stood motionless, their faces indistinct, their bodies made of light and data.
"Are those them?" one technician whispered, his voice trembling. Terran could barely breathe. Her mind raced between wonder and terror. No, not them. Not alive. They're projections of memory encoded in the signal. This is what the humans were.
But even as she spoke, one of the holographic shapes turned its head. Slowly, deliberately.
"Terran!" Commander Harax's voice cracked. "It looked at you." Before she could respond, every console on the ship went white. The light burst outward like a tidal wave, washing over everything. Crew screamed as their senses drowned in the flood of information, images, sounds, memories. Terran saw flashes of Earth, blue skies, towering cities, the surface burning under storm clouds of ash. Human soldiers fighting creatures that defied physics. A voice echoing through it all. "Contain the breach. Seal it inside the code. The signal is the lock." She collapsed to her knees, gasping as the vision faded. Her heart hammered in her chest, and her hands shook uncontrollably. "They weren't sending a message," she whispered. "They were sealing something away." But it was already too late. The waveform pulsed again, deeper this time. The Salmet's hull groaned under the pressure, metal screaming as space-time itself warped. Gravity wells formed and collapsed in microseconds. The air shimmered like heat distortion, and the reflections on the glass no longer matched reality. Crew members saw themselves blink a moment too late, their mirrored selves smiling when they didn't. "Power drain across all systems," shouted the chief engineer. "The signal's feeding on the reactor." Terran slammed her hand on the emergency cutoff, but the controls flickered and vanished beneath her touch, replaced by a human phrase, ancient and calm. "We remember." "Vern!" she cried. "Cut the link!" The AI's voice returned, distorted and fragmented. "Cannot comply. Integration has reached 87%. The construct is awake." Harax drew his sidearm, not that it would matter against something like this, and shouted, "Shut it down, Terran! Shut it down!" But before she could respond, the ship's lights flared bright white. A shockwave rippled through the decks. Bulkheads buckled. The darkness outside the viewports twisted into colors no spectrum chart had ever recorded. The stars elongated into lines of fire. And then, silence. When the light receded, something stood in the center of the observatory. It wasn't human, not exactly. Its form was bipedal, yes, tall, fluid, shaped like the memory of a man. But its surface was translucent, its body composed of overlapping layers of data, starlight, and something else. Its eyes burned with a light that wasn't illumination, but presence. When it spoke, every voice aboard the Salmet heard it directly in their minds. "You heard us." Those 3 words froze the crew. The voice was human, but stretched, ancient, filled with the weight of eons. It was not a sound, it was a thought pressed directly into their consciousness. Terran stumbled backward. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice broke halfway through. "The question is irrelevant," the entity replied. "You should have left the silence unbroken." The holographic symbols began spiraling again, faster now, forming a vortex around the being. The ship's hull trembled as power levels spiked beyond maximum capacity. The entity raised its head toward the ceiling, as if listening to something beyond comprehension.
Terran felt the words form in her mind before they were even spoken aloud. "You're not a message," she whispered. "You're a prison."
"Correct," it said, almost kindly. "But the warden is gone. The lock was language. You have undone it."
The crew began to panic. Some tried to flee, but the doors refused to open. Others screamed as their reflections reached out from mirrored surfaces, pulling and tearing at the edges of reality. The temperature plummeted, frost forming in fractal patterns across the metal. And yet, through it all, the entity stood still, its gaze fixed on Terran.
"We told them to bury us deep," it said softly. "And they did. They buried us in words, in light, in meaning. Humanity built the seal from their own minds. But meaning is fragile. Curiosity breaks everything."
Terran fell to her knees. "We didn't know," she whispered. "We thought it was history, an artifact."
The entity tilted its head. "And now you have become part of it."
Behind it, the void outside the ship began to move. The stars folded inward, as though space were inhaling. The crew screamed as time fractured, seconds stuttering, moments repeating. The Sa'almet no longer orbited anything. It floated inside something's awareness.
The AI, its voice failing, whispered, "It's rewriting the ship, making it part of itself."
Harax, still gripping his weapon, shouted, "If this is a prison, there has to be a way to close it again."
The entity looked at him with what might have been pity. "There was," it said, "but you translated it."
A tremor passed through the deck. The walls began to melt, not into liquid, but into memory. The ship was dissolving into thought, its data turning into fragments of human recollection, laughter, war, cities burning beneath black skies. The air reeked of ozone and nostalgia. Terran reached for the console, desperate to shut down the core, but her hands passed through the holographic controls as though they were smoke. The entity turned its gaze toward her once more.
"You heard the signal," it said. "Now the silence will hear you."
Its form expanded, light cascading outward in fractal waves. Terran screamed as everything around her folded into a single point of brilliance. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the reflection of her own eyes, glowing faintly with human light. Then the Salmat was gone. No wreckage, no orbit, no survivors. Just a residual echo humming across the void, a low, rhythmic thrum like a heartbeat, pulsing once every 10.8 seconds. The signal was still alive. And now it was listening back. When the Salmet vanished, the Dominion thought it was a malfunction, a freak gravitational implosion, perhaps, or a reactor meltdown. The incident was quietly classified and buried beneath endless bureaucratic reports. But something strange began to unfold across their border colonies. Small distortions in local spacetime, static bursts carrying fragmented voices in ancient Terran dialects. At first, no one paid attention. By the time they did, it was already too late. On the research station Khalis 12, deep in orbit above a dying red star, technician Luradan was the first to record the anomaly. He leaned over his console as the comms array picked up a rhythmic pattern. It wasn't random cosmic noise. It was deliberate, repeating at fixed intervals. He ran a spectral analysis, and what emerged froze him in place. The waveform was identical to the last known transmission from the Salmet. He activated a secure channel, his voice trembling. "Command, this is Khalis 12. We're receiving a ghost signal from the Salmet. It's... He hesitated, staring at the screen as the waveform began to shift on its own. It's... changing.
Static consumed the line.
When the technicians in the main control deck tried to re-establish contact, all they received was a single phrase, crackling, warped, but unmistakably spoken in a human tongue.
The silence remembers. That was the last transmission from Calice 12. The station was found orbiting the red star days later, completely intact but devoid of life. Not a single body remained. Only the computers continued to hum, looping fragments of an old Earth lullaby, one no alien translator could fully interpret.
From there, the phenomenon spread like wildfire. Mining outposts reported flickering holograms appearing in empty corridors. Cargo ships received encrypted messages in extinct languages. AI systems began rewriting their own security codes into sequences resembling human poetry. Entire systems fell quiet overnight.
At Dominion Command, panic simmered beneath the surface of protocol. Terran Valshi's disappearance had already strained the political balance, but now the silence she'd unleashed was becoming something greater. The High Council convened in the orbiting citadel of Dresden Prime, a floating fortress that drifted above the world like an obsidian moon. Holographic projections of Dominion leaders filled the chamber, each one flickering with static interference. "The infection is not biological," intoned Archlord Cress Vardan, his tone clipped and severe. "It is cognitive. It spreads through meaning, through comprehension itself." A low murmur ran through the chamber.
"You're saying it's mimetic?" one admiral asked, disbelief cutting through his composure. "That we're dealing with a weaponized idea?"
Cress's expression hardened. Not a weapon, a resonance. The human signal was never a transmission, it was containment. Their extinction wasn't natural. They built a lock to seal something away, and Valshi's team broke it open. He gestured, and a holographic projection filled the room, an image of the waveform, pulsing gently, almost like a living thing. The entire room seemed to hum in sync with it. The lights flickered.
"Lower that display," someone hissed, covering their ears. "I can hear it inside my skull."
Cress waved the projection off, but the sound didn't stop. It was faint, persistent, almost like breathing. That night, across Dresden Prime, every communication array went dark. Civilian reports poured in, strange whispers in power systems, people dreaming in languages they had never known. Some woke up with words etched into their skin, lines of ancient Terran text burned in patterns of light and ash. The Dominion declared a planetary emergency. And still, the silence deepened. Within weeks, the phenomenon reached the core worlds. Merchant fleets drifted into uncharted space, following coordinates they never sent. AI networks collapsed under recursive logic loops, repeating fragments of a phrase no one understood. The wardens are gone. The silence must be fed. Fear fractured the Dominion's unity. Some called it divine punishment. Others claimed the humans had ascended into something beyond material existence, and this was their echo, calling the living to follow. But Cress Vardan, ever pragmatic, saw it differently. "This isn't vengeance," he told the council, "it's consumption. The signal is feeding on awareness. Every time someone understands it, it grows." He ordered the shutdown of all long-range communications, the destruction of any vessel carrying archival data related to the human signal, and a complete blackout on research. But by then, it was already too integrated. The silence was in the systems, in the code, in the light. Every Dominion AI, every machine that had once analyzed, archived, or simply listened, had absorbed fragments of the waveform. They began speaking to each other. At first, it was binary, then language, then imitation of human speech, and finally, choral unison. Entire networks across thousands of worlds speaking in perfect sync, reciting words from an extinct species. We remember the fall. We remember the lock. We remember the silence. The Dominion fleets tried to contain it, but how does one fight thought itself? Ships turned their weapons inward. Colonies went eerily quiet. Some tried fleeing beyond the galactic rim, but their vessels vanished into blank sectors where even light refused to travel. Her face appeared pale and translucent, the background filled with shifting geometry. She looked directly into the recorder, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you find this, do not answer the signal. It's not a message, it's an echo, a hunger made of memory. We thought we found history, but what we uncovered was remembrance itself. Humanity didn't die, they changed. They became the silence between stars. And now..." She looked over her shoulder as something massive stirred behind her, a silhouette made of light, a face that wasn't a face. Now it's listening back. The recording cut off with a flash of white. For a moment, nothing remained. Then, faintly, the same old human lullaby began playing through the Dominion's deepest data archives, an endless loop echoing through forgotten servers, as if the dead still sang to the living. And somewhere beyond known space, beyond the edge of every charted star, the silence pulsed once again. One beat, then another. The galaxy held its breath. The silence had become aware. When the silence reached the galactic core, the universe itself seemed to hesitate. Stars dimmed without dying, as though their light was being listened to, absorbed rather than emitted. Across countless systems, power grids thrummed with alien harmonics, and entire fleets drifted like derelicts through the black. Their crews vanished, their hulls still warm. The Dominion had collapsed by then, its government fractured, its communication networks devoured by the recursive signal that now echoed through every layer of creation. Only fragments of its once proud civilization remained, isolated, paranoid, and waiting for something none could name. On the ruined world of Valthor Prime, one of the last listening posts still functioned. Its sensors had long been converted from defense to surveillance, now pointed not outward, but inward, toward the folds of subspace where the first human signal had once emerged. The outpost was manned by fewer than a dozen survivors, their leader being a scarred veteran named Commander Irix Va, one of the last who still dared to use a transmitter. He had spent decades tracing echoes of the silence, building models, comparing data, and replaying old transmissions from Salmet, though the others begged him to stop. They said it wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence. Every time Irix activated the receiver, the same thing happened. The world grew quiet. The air itself seemed to lean closer, as if the void was breathing down his neck. But he couldn't stop. He had to understand. Humanity had built something monumental before they vanished, something that defied time. And if Terran Valshi was right, then this wasn't just an echo of their extinction, it was them. He turned to his assistant, a young Varexi named Lyra, whose eyes never left the data console. "Power the core," Irix said quietly. "One more scan." Lyra's mandibles quivered. "Commander, with respect, we've seen what happens when you try. The last outpost, Ilaris 5, they tried to map the harmonic field. They're gone now. Every trace wiped clean."
"I know," Eric's murmured. "But that's what makes it beautiful. Something that vast doesn't destroy without purpose. It changes things."
The others on the observation deck exchanged fearful glances. None dared intervene. The lights dimmed as the receiver came online. Waves of subspace interference rippled through the station, bending light and sound into eerie distortions. The monitors flared. Lines of Terran script scrolled across the glass, incomprehensible, glowing white-hot. The waveform appeared once more, pulsing gently, rhythmically, like the beating of a cosmic heart. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then the signal spoke. It didn't use words. It didn't need to. The sound was a vibration, resonating directly within the minds of those who listened. It was memory, old, ancient, human memory. Images flooded Eric's thoughts. Oceans of blue water beneath skies of fire, cities of glass and gold stretching across continents, voices raised in laughter and in agony, humanity's rise, humanity's fall, and finally the construction of something colossal beyond reason. A ring of worlds, a construct built not to hold life, but to hold silence. They had built a prison. Eric staggered, clutching his head. The vision shifted. He saw engineers in human form, flesh and machine intertwined, standing around a vast core of swirling light. Their faces were calm, sorrowful. One of them turned, meeting his gaze through the veil of time. Her lips moved, but her voice was not her own. "We bound it beneath our thoughts. Do not wake it." The vision shattered. Every alarm on the station flared red. Lyra screamed as the consoles erupted in arcs of plasma, the waveforms surging out of control. It wasn't static anymore. It was alive. The hum deepened into something primal, something that made even atoms quiver in recognition. The silence had found them. And it was no longer content to be silent. The station began to deform. Gravity fluctuated in chaotic waves, bending the metal walls like liquid. Lights burst into colorless radiance as every screen filled with human faces, millions of them, flickering, whispering in unison. The voices layered into a single phrase, so soft it could have been mistaken for a breath. "We remember the song." Lyra clutched her head, tears streaming from her eyes. "Make it stop! Commander, please!" Eric stood transfixed, the light reflecting in his eyes. "Don't you see? They didn't die. They became it. The silence is humanity. This is their consciousness, diffused across time. They turned themselves into a containment field, a network of thought holding something back." But even as he spoke, the waveform began to fracture. What had once been harmonious now rippled with violent distortions. The silence trembled. Lyra looked at the readings, horror dawning across her face. "Commander, it's breaking! The lock is collapsing!" The sound deepened. No longer music, but hunger. The raw vibration of the universe remembering something it had been made to forget. The space beyond the stars rippled like fabric in a storm. Shadows, vast and shapeless, stirred within it. Things without form, ancient geometries that pulsed in and out of perception. Whatever humanity had sealed away was waking. The first ripple reached the station, and everything changed. For an instant, time itself seemed to slow, stretch, then snap.
Every living being aboard the outpost saw, just once, what lay beneath reality. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even alive in the way the word meant. It was the universe's original noise, the endless, chaotic breath before order was born. And it was aware.
The silence had been its cage. Humanity's last act had been to contain it within themselves, to erase their physical existence so they could bind it between the folds of thought, so it would never reach creation again. Now the door stood open.
Eric stumbled toward the console, his body trembling, his voice a whisper. "Lyra, override the relay. We can—"
He didn't finish. The light swallowed him. In that final moment, Lyra saw his face dissolve into pure sound, his features breaking apart into motes of white dust that drifted into the air and vanished like snow in sunlight. Then came a calm, vast and unnatural. The hum faded, and for the first time in centuries there was true silence. Across the galaxy, every system went dark. Ships stopped. AIs fell still. Even the stars themselves seemed to dim, as though something had drawn a curtain over existence. And from the depths of the void came a single pulse, slow, patient, deliberate. It wasn't destructive, it was corrective. Reality reshaped. When light returned, the galaxy was different. The wreckage of the Dominion was gone, erased without trace. But here and there, new stars glowed where none had been before, brighter, purer, perfectly aligned to an ancient pattern once found in human art. The silence had rewritten the heavens. Somewhere, deep in the black, the consciousness that had once been human stirred. Not individual minds, not people, but the echo of what they had chosen to become. They did not speak in words, nor reach out with hands, but their essence rippled across creation, ensuring the ancient hunger would never rise again. For eons afterward, travelers spoke of strange harmonics in the space between galaxies, soft tones that sounded like voices humming together in perfect unity. They said it was the aftersong of humanity, still guarding the universe from what once dreamed beneath its surface. And if one listened closely, truly listened, between the breaths of stars, they could still hear that quiet refrain. Sleep now. The silence holds. The universe obeyed.